If at any point throughout this episode you're interested in supporting Blue Dragon, links to donate will be in the description. Hey guys, welcome back to Flipside Fluent. I'm Gabby.
And I'm Georgia.
And today we've got a really awesome guest coming on. So we're going to be joined by Michael Brosowski.
Yeah, so he's the founder of Blue Dragon, which is an anti-slavery organisation based over in Vietnam. And the work he's done is honestly beyond incredible. So we're really keen just to dive into such a different topic for us and something that's really important and just shed some light on it.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue that I feel like we don't cover that much in Australia. And so I'm really excited to kind of become more aware ourselves and hopefully share some of that insight with you guys. Hi Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. So excited to get into all the work you've done with Blue Dragon. But before we get into that, do you mind just telling us a bit about yourself and how you ended up in Vietnam?
Sure. I'm a high school teacher from Australia. I used to teach in Sydney as an ESL teacher, where a lot of my students were the children of Vietnamese immigrants, as well as children from all around the world. And I came to Vietnam first on holiday, and I was really impressed by the country, by the spirit that it had, its hunger for education. And so I moved here in 2002. And I've been living here in Vietnam ever since, and working with Blue Dragon Children's Foundation.
Wow. And how did you first notice that there was an issue of human trafficking when you were in Vietnam?
Well, Blue Dragon first started as an organisation helping street children in Hanoi. We didn't think we were going to deal with this issue of human trafficking, but where we first encountered it was actually on a trip that I had to Ho Chi Minh City in the south of Vietnam, where I noticed a boy on the street selling flowers, and every time he sold a flower, he would walk to the end of the alleyway where we were, and he'd give money to some women who were sitting there. And so I knew enough to recognize that something was wrong. And I got chatting with him, and he had a very distinct accent. So throughout Vietnam, there are very different accents in different regions, and he clearly was not from Ho Chi Minh City. So just chatting with him, I realized what had happened, and he was desperate to get out. So that was my first encounter, actually, of domestic trafficking, whereas now we tend to work a lot more in the trafficking across the border into China.
How did Blue Dragon first come about and go about in finding people who have been trafficked?
With that little boy, I helped him to leave that situation and to get back to his countryside. Used a bit of bluff and bluster with the traffickers, and he went back. And then my staff travelled from our headquarters here in Hanoi to that little boy's village, and we discovered that it was quite a big issue. It wasn't just this one child, and we learned that there were different kinds of trafficking. So the kids weren't only being taken to sell flowers on the street, even though that was happening. There were also lots of kids in sweatshops, mostly garment factories, often small home-based factories. And so we explored this, we investigated and got some evidence of it and took it back to the families of those children. They thought that their children were learning a trade. A lot of them thought their children were actually going to school and studying. Once they could see clearly that was not happening, they asked us, please bring our children home. And so that was the start of our rescue operations, which we continue today.
Wow. Yeah. So what was the process there? I mean, between noticing an issue and then actually starting Blue Dragon? What was the process behind developing a non-profit in a foreign country and really bringing that into fruition?
So that takes me back to 2002 when I was here in Hanoi and seeing street children. So, both with our work with street children and with human trafficking, we started dealing with those issues without having any experience in it, without actually knowing how a non-profit is meant to work and what we're meant to do. But it was a very human response that we had. We saw that there were people in need, and we just asked ourselves, what can we do? So initially with street children, my answer was I could teach English. That was my training, that was my qualification, and that was a need among the children. They could see that if they studied English, they could make more money on the street. They could talk to foreigners, they could bargain for better prices. And so I started an English class, and other Vietnamese people joined me in that, and we started teaching subjects as well. We started teaching, running a football club, which still runs today. And so it was just a matter of getting in there, rolling up our sleeves and just trying something, doing something. And once we had done that, there was momentum that, okay, now this is happening. What do we do with it? And so we formed Blue Dragon.
Wow, that's amazing. Momentum is really everything, we always say.
Yeah.
In terms of human trafficking, for people who don't know, how big is the extent of human trafficking currently?
Well, actually, nobody really knows. There's a global indicator that's published annually by the Walk Free Foundation, and they're estimating that it's over 40 million people are in slavery right at the moment. Now, that might be right, but actually it's notoriously difficult to get data on this. So when I look at the statistics for Vietnam, for example, I don't know the statistics here. Nobody does, but I do believe that they're estimated.
Yeah.
The problem with trafficking, if I can explain why it's so difficult.
Yeah.
If you go up into the mountains of northern Vietnam, where people might not speak the language that we call Vietnamese. So in Vietnam, there are actually many languages, more than 60 languages.
Wow.
If you go up into the mountains where you have those ethnic minority groups, and you ask people, are your children here or are they missing? People will say, well, my children aren't here, they've gone away to work somewhere. And if you probe further, if you ask, do you know where they are? Well, no, they left 2 years ago. And finally, if you ask, so were they trafficked? The answer would be no, they weren't trafficked. They went with someone who came to the village offering jobs. They've gone to work somewhere. So there's often just a complete misunderstanding about what human trafficking is. And across regions within Vietnam, let alone across the world, there are very different understandings. There are different legal definitions of trafficking. And all it adds up to is a huge mess of we don't know. And in a way, that's okay. If you're in a boat that's full of water, you don't need to know exactly how many cubic meters of water are there before you start grabbing a bucket and throwing the water out, right? You just start. I think when trafficking is a lot more under control, it will help to have a lot more accurate data, because then you'll know exactly where that help is needed. But for now, even though the data is really poor, we can still do something. We don't have to wait.
Definitely.
So I'd be interested in knowing, in terms of combating the issue, what do Blue Dragon do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I've mentioned that we started out helping those children who were trafficked within Vietnam, and they were mostly going to sweatshops in southern Vietnam. We don't do that anymore because we're not needed anymore. So we started a process of, first of all, investigating. We would go to the villages where the children were being taken from. They were in certain regions of Vietnam. One was in Hue province in the center, and one was in Dien Bien province in the northwest mountains. So we'd go and we'd talk to families. We'd explain what had happened if their children were actually going to these garment factories. And we would get their permission to bring their children home. Now, often these parents were illiterate, and their permission might be a thumbprint on a piece of paper. We would then travel to Ho Chi Minh City, and we'd search for those factories. The parents didn't know where the children were. If we were lucky, the parents had a mobile telephone number for the factory owner. And so we would investigate and find the factories. And initially, we would go into the factories ourselves and say to the owners, these children are coming with us. Over time, the factory owners knew that we might be coming, and they would get more hostile and aggressive. So we changed our approach, and we would take police with us. And then once the children were set free, they would give statements to the police, and we would take them home. Now that went on for about 10 years, but it got to the point that the factory owners gave up, right? They eventually said, look, this is too difficult, it's too risky, let's just hire adults. And so our work there has largely finished. But while we were doing that, we also came across the issue of Vietnamese girls and women, sometimes boys and men also, but mostly girls and women, being trafficked into China, and mostly for sexual exploitation. So to be sold into brothels or as brides against their will. And the methodology was always the same variations on a theme, that they would be tricked into doing this. They would think they were going on a short trip with someone they knew and trusted, or that they were going for a job and they were perfectly safe and they could come back anytime they wanted. And once they crossed the border, they were taken as slaves. So again, Blue Dragon's work is to investigate, to try to find out where these people are, and then to help them to escape that and then report to the police. It's an ongoing process. As I'm talking to you today, we're very, very close to reaching our 1,000th rescue.
Wow.
I think that by the end of 2020, we'll have rescued 1,000 people from slavery. And so this method that we have really works. There'll always be more rescues to do, and you know, we're looking to how do we get past that? How do we get to a point where we don't have to rescue anymore, but we're about to hit our 1,000th rescue.
That's amazing. How does it differ when it comes to being trafficked across internationally? Like, how do you work with the Chinese government to try and get these people back to Vietnam?
The very first time that we did a rescue in China, it was not what it was meant to be. We were actually meant to just go there and look for someone, and if we could find their location, we were going to report to the police. But it got a bit out of hand, and my staff ended up basically running for their lives with two girls who they'd rescued. And they kind of ran into the arms of the Chinese military, who said, "What are you doing here? You know, what's going on?" And detained our people. But later on discovered that actually these two Blue Dragon staff had done something quite good. And the military then went and set some more girls free, 4 more girls from that brothel, and arrested the brothel owners. So that was our first rescue, where we didn't actually work at all with the Chinese government. And it could have gone very badly. At the end of that rescue, we said, never again, that's it, you know, we shouldn't do this. That was not meant to happen. So for some years we didn't, but then later on we started getting more calls for help. So now, if we can simply inform the Chinese police and they will do the rescue, then that's what we do. But sometimes there might be an urgency or a special sensitivity that might mean somebody from Blue Dragon needs to find that person in China and get them to safety. But we still always report to the Chinese police, at least when we get back to the border with China, when we're absolutely certain that it's safe. In fact, during this year, during coronavirus, we haven't been so able to rescue in China. We've still been rescuing victims of trafficking there. But more than that, we've been receiving victims of trafficking who have been rescued by the Chinese police and handed across the border. So even just this morning, we received 2 women and a 5-year-old boy who were trafficked. And we don't even know their full story yet, but they're now in our care. And so that has greatly increased. And that's a terrific sign that actually the Chinese government is doing a lot more than we are, as you would expect.
Yeah, wow. I'd be interested in getting into that. You mentioned the coronavirus and how that's impacted it. How has that impacted your work within Vietnam as well?
Yeah, the analogy I use is it's like a grenade going off in a situation that was already volatile. So we have a process, you know, both for working with street children and finding people who've been trafficked. We have staff who have done this dozens and dozens, hundreds, going into thousands of times. It's not easy, and every case is different, but we kind of, we have certain processes and systems in place. Coronavirus has upended that. So the example of China is a good one where, our method relies on us being able to travel freely and legally through China. But once coronavirus hit, borders were closed, not only international, but within countries as well. And so there we've had to rely a lot more on working with Chinese partners and police to get people to safety. Whereas last year and in previous years, we've done a lot of rescues ourselves and also received some people rescued by the Chinese police. This year, our data is coming out the opposite, that we've rescued a few people and received a lot of people. Now here in Hanoi, where we work with street children, we've seen a doubling of the number of homeless children on the streets. So our work has grown and also changed. Within Vietnam, we're seeing some different kinds of trafficking as well that we hadn't really seen before. So everything is different, and we've had to constantly shift our work during this year.
What, you mentioned that you've been seeing different kinds of trafficking. What are like the kind of basic forms of trafficking?
Well, most of the trafficking that we deal with is to do with girls and women being deceived, and largely they're being offered opportunities. So women in maybe a very poor area being offered a job so that they can support their family. So it's a very exploitative approach to begin with. And sometimes the trafficking is based on a relationship. So a girl going out with a boy who she thinks loves her, but in the end is a trafficker. So what we've seen this year, because of COVID-19, people need more opportunities. There's one estimation that about 30 million people in Vietnam either lost their job or reduced their income or their working hours. It's a country of 100 million people, and 30 million people have been adversely affected. So this is a field day for the traffickers. A lot more people now are desperate for a job. And you have people who maybe were the sole breadwinner for their family. Maybe they live in the countryside, they'd come into the cities and were working in hospitality, and every month their salary was going home to support their mum and dad and their brothers and sisters to go to school and to be able to eat. So what's happened now? Those jobs are gone. It's not only one person who loses an income, it's a whole family, sometimes an extended family. So now the traffickers are more able to say, hey, look, I do know a place where there's a job, come with me, everything will be okay. We've seen, for example, groups of girls, up to 6 girls at a time, being taken within Vietnam on the promise of jobs and being sold into karaoke bars that are fronts for brothels. We've seen Hmong men who live normally on the tops of mountains being trafficked to the ocean to be sold onto fishing boats. And we've seen quite a few cases of pregnant women being trafficked towards China, but fortunately being stopped along the way, being trafficked so that their babies could be sold in China. So all of these sorts of trafficking, we've come across them here and there before, but they've escalated because the traffickers see it so much more opportunity.
Yeah. Is there, does your organisation focus at all on increasing awareness in those communities of recognising traffickers and things like that?
Yeah, awareness is helpful in some contexts to some extent.
Okay.
So, for example, when we were working on that issue of children being trafficked to sweatshops, that was a situation where a kind of awareness was helpful, because actually the parents had no idea what was happening. They thought their children were going to study. They were allowing their children to go, not knowing that those people were traffickers. So it was a very geographically bound kind of trafficking. It was happening in certain areas. And so we could go to those areas and we could talk with the families. And what we found was very, very helpful was community meetings. So not mass media, not putting the Blue Dragon logo on big posters, but sitting down with people, usually sitting down with mums and just talking to them, showing them photos and also listening to what they had to say. That was super effective. Once families had been through that process, they were not going to let their child go to work somewhere. This issue of the trafficking to China is very different. Awareness is not very helpful. Everyone is aware of it. But remember that the girl or the woman being trafficked, she thinks she's going with someone that she knows. These traffickers might build up a relationship over weeks or months, sometimes a year. And then they invite them, come with me. It's always a very realistic offer. The woman has every reason to believe that she's going with someone that she trusts. What is helpful is training border guards, training police who might be able to identify it, and also helping them to be more able to understand Vietnamese law, knowing how to put a case together. What helps is prosecution of traffickers, making sure that traffickers get sentenced to prison and that everyone knows about that. Now that's a deterrent for traffickers. So that's looking more on the trafficker side, right, than looking on the victim side. And finally, you know, if people have opportunity at home, then they don't need to go with a trafficker. They don't need to take that risk. So part of this is about creating opportunity, developing livelihoods, helping people to buy livestock, for example, helping people start businesses, or simply keeping them in school so that when the trafficker comes along and says, do you want to come with me? They're not even considering it. I don't need to. I've got everything I need right here. So there's a lot of different things, and awareness has some role to play, but not as much role as people often think.
So in terms of supporting these communities and victims of trafficking, how is Blue Dragon supported? And I'd be interested to know, how does the Vietnamese government support the organisation?
Yeah, well, you know, community by community is very, very different. There's one community where we work where typically women grow corn, and they grow it it's an extremely mountainous area. If you or I looked at that area, we would say, no, you can't farm in this area. You know, it's like that you're looking at the side of a cliff, and these women grow corn. They traditionally, or in the last 20 years or so, they've been using a lot of chemicals on the corn for pesticide and for fertilizer, and they're not getting very good results. And because of that, they're prone to trafficking. They're not earning a lot of money. So when someone comes along and, you know, especially when they've had a bad harvest, someone comes and says, oh, look, that's all right, come with me. I know this place where you can work. So we had a look there and we could see if these women could have a better yield, if they could harvest more corn, they'd be safer. We brought in some partners because we're not corn growers as a children's foundation, but we found some people who knew more than we did, brought them in, and we taught them organic corn growing. And it was a very small sample. It was 6 families, and their yield was like 3 times the yield of everyone around them using the normal method.
Wow.
Well, now everyone in that community is starting to grow organic corn. Now that's in one area. In another area, we've taught people how to raise fish in lagoons. In other areas, we've helped families to buy buffalo or to buy chickens. But ultimately, don't forget, sometimes people actually want to go to university or want to finish grade 12 and go off and get a job in hospitality or whatever it is. So community by community and family by family, there are very different solutions. And you asked also about the Vietnamese government's role in this. And that's really important. Blue Dragon is not a huge NGO. And even if we were, some of the problems we're talking about here really need a macro solution. You know, we can't generate thousands and millions of new jobs, and that's what's needed. And so what we can do, our role is more like plugging the gaps where maybe the Vietnamese government has a plan and has implemented some economic measures or has developed an industrial zone, for example. But we can find the families who still miss out on that. Maybe the families who are just too poor or don't have the education to even get started. Families that don't have legal paperwork. A lot of people in Vietnam don't have a birth certificate. So they don't apply. They can't even apply for government support. So we can help them. And while we do that, if we can show the Vietnamese government, look, this is what Blue Dragon has done, and this works really well. You can do that as well. And we can show them how we've done it. And then they can adopt the model that we create. And so in that way, you see there's an interplay between an organization like Blue Dragon and the Vietnamese government, where we're doing different things, but what we do complement each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting, both like the role of the micro and macro to create change. You did mention that the macro is exceptionally important in actually creating that change as well. What would you say are like the biggest issues or like what's the biggest like need for reform?
A good sustainable development. And that, you know, the phrase sustainable development is kind of misused. It's become a generic term where anything is called sustainable development. What I mean is the creation of industry and jobs that is good for the environment and good for the population.
Yeah.
So to explain a little what I mean there has been a huge growth in manufacturing in Vietnam. And that's been terrific for the Vietnamese economy. What I worry is it's created a lot of pollution, and a lot of the jobs there are jobs that don't really have a great future. You can work in that job for 10 years and at the end of it, you're not actually skilled to do something else. Now, those jobs have been good because people have been able to earn an income. And a lot of people now are joining the Vietnamese middle class. So I don't want to say this was a mistake, should never have done that.
Yeah.
But it's like the next phase is thinking, how do we make these jobs good for everyone, good for the society, good for the environment? And we can see that there are opportunities, especially in alternative energy, for example. Vietnam still relies a lot on the traditional coal and oil, but there's massive opportunity here. You know, I'm looking out my window at a very sunny day. There's so much opportunity there. And those sustainable industries bring with them millions of jobs. I think if Vietnam can start making the shift in that direction, and I do believe that there's that potential and it may have already started, this will help a lot coincidentally, in reducing issues like human trafficking and homelessness.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I love how Blue Dragon takes such a multifaceted approach at actually really helping the root causes. Yeah. And helping people get out of poverty. It's so beautiful. Where do you think Blue Dragon's kind of headed in down the line?
We're a very organic organization, and we do have strategic vision. For example, we have a document that we've written explaining exactly how we work, but actually long-term plans we've realized are just not helpful. And 2020, by the way, I've got to say, has proven us right.
Yeah.
Planning is something you can think about it, but hey, you've got no control in the end.
Yeah.
We'll always be working with children who are homeless. We'll always be working on human trafficking. Those issues will take different forms over time. Now, for example, when we started working with street children here in Hanoi, they were mostly children who had come from the countryside with their parents' permission. Sometimes their mother had come as well, and they were earning money and sending that home each month. After a few years, there were some changes in things in the cities, and so children weren't so safe to work on the street. They could be detained and sent to sort of detention centres and facilities that they didn't want to go to. So they had to go underground. And that meant that whereas earlier they'd been shining shoes and selling postcards, now they started stealing things. They were robbing people, committing crimes as a way of surviving. Then, of course, the police had to crack down on that. And so the children changed their work again. And then we were dealing with a lot of children who were being sexually exploited for money. And so, you know, our street children's program, one single program, over the course of 15 years has gone through these major changes. We don't know what that next change will be. And that's the challenge for us. Same as with human trafficking. We don't know what it will look like in 5 years. So instead of us saying, you know, this is what we're going to do in 5 years or in 10 years, we have to build an organization that can pivot quickly, that can adapt no matter what the situation is. And 2020 has been the ultimate test of that. And I think we've passed quite well in showing our ability. I mean, it looks like we're growing at the moment. We didn't mean to. In fact, we thought, look, we're really going to have to batten down the hatches. We're going to have to slow down. It looks like we're growing again. And it's because there are so many needs and so many new needs that we just have to run to catch up to it. We'll keep working on these issues and we'll keep with our model of working on the ground, you know, working with individual people while looking up to that macro level, saying, so what laws could change here to make things better? What new policies could there be that would reduce trafficking or that would support homeless children? This coming year, we will be working with the Vietnamese government on a revision of the anti-trafficking law. So every 10 years, all of the major laws automatically come up for review. Now, with our experience, you know, we've rescued 1,000 people from trafficking. We've been in over 100 court cases representing survivors of trafficking. We've got a lot to say about the current law. We have a lot of ideas about how it could be strengthened. So in this coming year, that's one of the main things that we'll be doing. And because of that, trafficking will be impacted. Hopefully, things will be much better after this revision of the law. And then I'm sure there'll be new challenges for us to deal with.
Yeah. I imagine that you're leading a very adaptable team.
Yes.
I'd also be interested in kind of getting into how you or how the organisation supports the victims that you rescue.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because so far I've been talking mostly about rescue and then, you know, changing laws. Yeah. But there's a lot in between that. So we see ourselves as having a responsibility there. If we get somebody home from trafficking, we can't just drop them off and say, you know, good luck with everything. We actually see a responsibility to continue helping. I do have to say, sometimes we rescue somebody who doesn't want any further help. They might want to go straight from the border back to their home. And if that's what they want, then that's fine. They can call us anytime. Our offer of support never ever ends. More typically, young women, teenage girls will come back with us. We'll offer emergency accommodation. We'll help them make statements to police. We'll take them for medical checkups. We have psychologists on staff who will offer counselling and support for as long as they want. And we have social workers who will help them enrol in school, find jobs, find accommodation. Now that service, as I say, it lasts as long as people want. I think one of the most powerful things that we do for survivors of trafficking is the family reunion, where we'll accompany them home. It's a very, very emotional moment when someone is back with their family. We've brought women home who were trafficked decades ago, more than 20 years. Their whole family thinks that they're dead. People never expect to see them again. Sometimes they've had funerals to say goodbye. Sometimes we bring home teenage girls who disappeared 6 months previously, and their parents thought that they'd run away or that they'd been kidnapped and would never be home again. So supporting families to come back together and to live together is incredibly powerful and important.
Yeah, wow. It's so beautiful to hear stories like that, and the work you guys do is so amazing. I think that a lot of people would have experiences where they see issues and want to make a change, but don't necessarily know how to go about that change, or are kind of unaware of the processes that it would take to actually make and create impact and change. What would you say are the things that really got you through that process of starting an organization and kind of making an idea a reality?
Yeah, there wasn't really a point, where I said, I want to start an organization, so I'm going to start helping children. It was the other way around. I saw people who needed help, and I just did what I could. And everyone watching this discussion can do that. It might mean helping the little old lady next door who needs a home cooked meal every now and then. It might be volunteering at a refugee centre, or helping out at a facility for stray cats. Every single one of us can do something where we are, and then just watch for that opportunity. If there is an opportunity, then to make that something bigger, and if that's what you want to do, then you can take it. I do remember the point where we realised we kind of need to start an organisation here, and that was because it was just growing out of control. And I was here as a foreigner in Vietnam. It had to be registered. The Vietnamese government was starting to look at me and the Vietnamese volunteers and the foreign volunteers who were with us and saying, well, who are you? In a country like Vietnam, the government needs to know who we are. We need to be registered. And so we did. In other places, you might not need to do that. You don't always have to register an organisation and start a charity. Sometimes you do. But whatever form it is, whether it's just you going out on your own on the weekends to visit somebody in a shelter, or to pick up rubbish from the beach, or whether it's forming something more substantial, I think that everyone can do something. And honestly, all of us in Blue Dragon believe if we all did something, then we'd have an amazing world. And I think we all want that, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's so amazing. It's just seeing and hearing about all the work that you do is just so inspiring. I definitely think that everybody needs to get involved in something. It's such a rewarding feeling, just doing something for the sake of being a good human being, I guess.
Also, what you mentioned just about like everyone doing their little part, it's like such small incremental changes. You mentioned like visiting someone in a shelter, that takes like half a day, and it's sometimes you only look at like a really big picture and think like I can't change that, but if it actually comes down to like all the little small steps, like there's so much potential.
We can all play a part.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I kind of have a view on this that's a little bit hard to explain. I do believe that organisations like Blue Dragon, that we should be looking at systemic change, how to improve laws, how to change things. But I equally believe that if all we ever did was help one person to escape from slavery, if that was the only thing we had done, that in itself would have been worthwhile. So I'm a strong believer that everything is about individuals. And if we can also change that systemic level, then that also makes things better for everyone. Never think that helping one person or changing one life is too small to be important.
Yeah,
definitely. I completely agree.
Just for our listeners and even for us, if we wanted to go about like supporting Blue Dragon, what are the best ways that we could do that?
Well, look, we really encourage people to donate to us, and we're talking about how helping one person is not a small thing. It's the same with donating. We have a lot of support from people who send us $5 a month or $10 a month. You know, we have an online community called Dragon Wings where people send whatever amount they choose each month, and that money is combined with other people's money and goes to helping with all the sorts of issues that I've talked about today. So whether it's a one-off donation of $20 at Christmas, or if it's signing up to Dragon Wings for $5 a month, that really helps. I mean, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and social media. Keep learning about these issues. If what we're talking about today inspires you or challenges you or encourages you to do some good, then keep following us. Keep getting involved in the conversation. Don't walk away thinking that was nice and then just go back to where you were. Let it change you. Let it impact you. I can see that that's where you're coming from in setting up this discussion, in setting up this regular podcast. You're wanting to create change. You can do it, okay? It's not beyond you. That's what I would say.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been such an amazing chat, and I think both of us could agree it's so insightful. Like what you mentioned about like gaining awareness about these issues. It's not something we're so blessed to have to be exposed to, but it's so nice to hear about how we can make change together. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate this chance to talk to you today.
No, it's awesome. Have a good one, Michael.